All right, the bad news is the Boston Bruins coughed up another third period lead against the Washington Capitals on Saturday. But the good news is they closed it out huge from there, winning in the shootout. Let's break it down on today's episode of Locked On Boston Bruins.
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. I'm your host, Ian McLaren, and this is a daily show where we discuss all things Spoked B. Today is Monday, April 1st, and I want to thank you so much for making Locked On Bruins part of your daily routine, free and available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Kindly hit that subscribe button so that each new episode is downloaded to your feeds and available to listen and watch, because we're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. I can't believe it is April already. I hope you all had a fantastic weekend celebrating Easter, if that's what you do. Trans Day of Visibility on Sunday. We had a big family gathering. Also had a bit of chill time, which was great. Saw Ghostbusters, Frozen Empire on Friday. It was a nice long weekend up here, and excited to be back talking about our Boston Bruins, who clinched the playoff spot on Thursday night, thanks to some teams losing, and now they're fighting for positioning with only 7 games remaining in the regular season, and we'll list their opponents coming up here later on, take a look at potential playoff opponents. But first, we're going to discuss Saturday's game against the Washington Capitals. Quick reminder, you can find the podcast on social media at Locked NHL Bruins. You can find me, my hockey thoughts, dad jokes at Ian C. McLaren. Lifelong Bruins fan, been covering this team for various outlets for 20 years, worked 5 years full-time for the Score covering the NHL, and very excited as another playoff season is almost upon us. Now, a huge problem for the Boston Bruins this season has been closing out games and not allowing the opposition to tie things up late, take points from them in overtime. The Bruins lead the NHL in terms of overtime and shootout losses. 15 of those, in which, yes, they have picked up 15 points, but technically those are losses. They have 43 wins, 17 regulation losses, and then 15 of these overtime and shootout losses, which again is the most in terms of regulation wins. As a result, they're pretty far down the list. But still, because of the loser point in the NHL, they are tied for third overall, and they picked up a huge 2 points against Washington on Saturday. It was a game that they led after the first period, thanks to a Hampus Lindholm goal, only his second of the season, assisted by Pavel Zacha and David Pastrnak. The Capitals were able to tie things up early on in the second, but Johnny Beecher, just a minute and 2 seconds later, scored a beautiful goal to give the Bruins a 2-1 lead. And I guess I'm wrong in saying that they gave up a third period lead. They were up 2-1 in the second. John Carlson tied things up later in the second period, and there was no scoring in the third. So the Bruins didn't allow a third period goal. They also didn't allow a goal in overtime, despite the fact that they had to kill off a 4-minute penalty. That's right. In overtime, Hampus Lindholm was called for a double minor high sticking against TJ Oshie, and the Bruins were on the penalty kill for a full 4 minutes in overtime. Generally, if you have a 4-minute power play in overtime at home, you expect to get the 2 points. But the Bruins were able to withstand the Washington attack. They were able to keep Alex Ovechkin and all at bay, pushing things to a shootout where it was, of all players, Kevin Shattenkirk who scored the winner in the skills competition to give the Bruins the win. And it was Shattenkirk himself who said it feels as though this team has kind of turned a corner. They've had their moments where they were losing a lot of these games a couple months ago, going into overtime, losing there or in shootouts. And this one really could have gone either way once it gets to a shootout. It is quite a crapshoot. And there were some goals both ways. Ultimately, the Bruins got one more than Washington and got the win. And Shattenkirk said it's great to see them turn a corner and taking some strides. Again, Boston killed a 4-minute power play in overtime after Lindholm was given that high-sticking double minor 57 seconds into the extra period. And Jeremy Swayman characterized the penalty kill as their 3 working harder than Washington's 4. It's 4-on-3 in overtime. All afternoon, he said the Bruins did a great job hounding pucks, keeping pucks below their red line. At the end of the day, the penalty kill came up with the win, and that's really exciting. It's a big momentum boost for the Bruins moving forward. And again, it's a situation where the Bruins have struggled all season long. They did have a lead. They coughed it up later in the second period, kept Washington off the board in third, but also failed to score. Once you get into overtime, they could have easily added to that league-leading 15 losses in overtime in a shootout, but the penalty kill came up so huge, and maybe this is a turning point for the Bruins. I've been saying for a few weeks here now that doesn't really matter as much, and I say this today on the Locked On NHL show. I don't think it matters as much if the Bruins finish in first, what their positioning is. What matters most is that they're playing the right way. They have that mentality where they're able to close out games, stay hard on pucks, make the right decisions with the puck. And they showed that, especially in overtime on Saturday against Washington, playing the right way, learning less. They say that this is a learning lesson. This is something we can move forward from and watch the video, break it down, move forward and not make the same mistakes. But still, they have been making those same mistakes. Saturday hopefully was a move in the right direction as they look to close out games and get really prepared for the playoffs. And today, being April 1st, it's hard to believe there's only 7 games remaining for the Boston Bruins. We'll take a look at what's up next for them this week and what those 7 games might hold here as the podcast continues. The NHL regular season is almost over, but I want to remind you that you can still win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. What players can you put your money on? Well, all you have to do is pick whether studs like Nathan McKinnon, Nikita Kucherov, David Pastrnak will record more or less than their sleeper projections on goals, assists, plus minus, and more in a given game. You can throw goalies in there as well and make a pick on saves. To win 100 times your bet, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. So win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. Start paying attention and nail your picks so you can win big. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions do apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. Thank you so much once again for making Locked On Bruins part of your daily routine, free and available on your favorite podcast app, Apple, Spotify, Pocket Casts, and also available on YouTube. You can also make the switch to Locked On Sports today, which is a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories with analysis from our local Locked On hosts, as well as our national shows. Streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, looking at the standings, the Bruins are one of 5 or 6 teams that have already played 75 games this regular season. That means, not a huge math guy, but they have 7 games remaining. In terms of point percentage, the Bruins currently are in a tie for 5th overall with the Carolina Hurricanes, 101 points, 67.3% of all available points they have picked up so far this season, behind the Colorado Avalanche and Vancouver Canucks, who are at 676, the Dallas Stars at 687, and the New York Rangers, the only team above 700. They are at 703, 104 points, and they are looking like the team to beat in the East, especially if Alex Lafreniere can continue his breakout. He had, I think, like 5 points in a game over the weekend. And the Bruins' schedule is not very friendly to end the season. They are off today, but they're in action tomorrow night in Nashville to take on the Predators. They are a team that has been red hot as of late. I think one of the top teams since the All-Star break in the NHL. They have just been excellent. And if we look at the standings since the All-Star break, which I believe was the first weekend of February until today, the Predators, they rank 4th in total points and 2nd in terms of point percentage since the All-Star break. So that's not going to be an easy one. And still, they're fighting for their playoff lives over in the Western Conference. This is a game we'll preview more tomorrow. But if you look at the wildcard standings, the Predators holding on to the top wildcard spot, although they are 8 points clear of St. Louis, who is the top team outside the playoff picture in the Western Conference. So the West seems pretty set in terms of the 8 teams still fighting for positioning. Now, after that game against the Predators, the Bruins will travel to Carolina to take on the Hurricanes. Also a very good team, and they have gotten even better recently after adding at the trade deadline, picking up Jake Gensel, Evgeny Kuznetsov, Peter Kochetkov, and Frederik Andersen have been a formidable tandem in net for them. And unfortunately, the Bruins have to play that team twice as well in the Hurricanes. They play them on Thursday and then again next Tuesday, April 9th. In between those 2 games is a Saturday afternoon tilt against the Florida Panthers, which should be a doozy. So that's 4 pretty difficult games coming up over the next 9 days for the Bruins. Nashville, Carolina twice, and the Florida Panthers. They get a bit of a reprieve to end the season. 3 days off after that Carolina game before they travel to Pittsburgh to take on the Penguins, who are not making the playoffs. Then they finish the regular season with a back-to-back in Washington. The Capitals still very much in the playoff race despite the loss to the Bruins on Saturday. And then Boston will finish off the regular season on April 16th at home against the Ottawa Senators, a team that's playing better as of late. That always seems to be their MO. They've won 5 in a row. They're 7-3, but well outside of the playoff race. And kind of excelling here when there's really nothing to be played for. So that's what April looks like for Boston. And again, it's not an easy schedule. That's 7 games, 4 of which are against surefire playoff teams and potential Stanley Cup contenders in Carolina, Florida, maybe Nashville as well. They could surprise once they get into the playoffs. And then Washington, who's fighting for their playoff lives, Pittsburgh, Ottawa. Those are the easiest games on the schedule, but they still have some very good players that you don't want to sleep on. So if we're looking at the Bruins, not coasting into the playoffs, working hard until the final buzzer, staying in playoff mode, because really the playoffs don't begin. They begin after game 82, but that playoff mentality, that the way you need to play in the playoffs to succeed, that has to kick in like now or even a couple weeks ago. If you look at Florida last year, they were playing playoff hockey for like a good month just to get into the postseason. And they carried that momentum. They carried that mentality all the way to the Stanley Cup final. You cannot coast into the NHL playoffs. You cannot just turn it on for game one. You have to be in that mode like right now. And the Bruins showed that in overtime against Washington. And they'll certainly have to keep it going if they want to challenge for first in the Atlantic and to play a wildcard team instead of bumping down into second and playing likely the Toronto Maple Leafs. Although it might not matter, as we'll see here coming up, where we will look at potential playoff opponents for the Boston Bruins in the first round. We'll touch on that here as the podcast continues. The sports calendar is absolutely loaded right now, and FanDuel is making it even more exciting to get in on the action. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you can use to bet on the big tournament, Major League Baseball, the NBA, NHL, and so much more. All you have to do is visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a big win. Again, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Major League Baseball is back. NBA, NHL, ramping up to the playoffs. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to make your first bet a big win at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Now, I'm not a huge if the playoffs started today guy, and trying to look ahead at matchups, and especially after last year, I'm a big proponent of it doesn't really matter what the matchup is. We saw last season, there was like a 40-point difference between the Bruins and the Panthers in round one. If ever there was, on paper, a series to be won, it was that one. But we all know what happened. It's a completely different ball game, puck game, when you get into the NHL postseason. I believe that now more than ever. Anything can happen once you get in there. Any team can challenge for the Stanley Cup. There's bad bounces, there's bad luck, there's injuries that pop up, and I really don't care who the Bruins are matched up against. It's going to be a tough out. Most everybody will be up against that in round one. If you just look over at the Western Conference, for example, you have the possibility of the Vancouver Canucks finishing first in the Pacific Division, and their reward for that will be a date with the Nashville Predators, who, again, are the hottest team in the NHL. The Dallas Stars, if they finish first, as they are in position to do right now, their first round opponent will be the LA Kings. Very, very good team. Edmonton has been red hot. it could be Edmonton and Vegas in round one. What a series that could be. Now, in the Eastern Conference, right now, the Bruins are first in the Atlantic Division, 2 points up on the Florida Panthers, although Florida does have a game in hand. The Bruins do have the advantage in terms of point percentage still, but Florida has many more regulation wins than the Bruins and a much better goal differential as well, I should add. Boston right now, 3 points back of the Rangers. So Rangers would play the top wildcard team, which would be right now the Philadelphia Flyers. And the Bruins, by finishing first in the Atlantic, would play the first wildcard team, which is the Tampa Bay Lightning. And we just saw Tampa beat the Bruins last week. They're 8-1-1 over their past 10. They have some of the best players in the world at their respective positions. What kind of reward is that, right? Oh, conversely, if they fall the second in the Atlantic, they could play the Toronto Maple Leafs, a team they have had better luck with this season, but still, they're loaded and would not be an easy out by any stretch of the imagination. No matter who you play, you could argue that the second wildcard team could be an easy out, whether it be Philadelphia, who, they're 3-5-2. They're really struggling lately, kind of backing into the playoffs. But let's say the Detroit Red Wings sneak up into that spot, or the Capitals fall down to that spot. Charlie Lindgren or Alex Lyon could easily steal a few games. We saw Lindgren play extremely well for the Capitals this past Saturday, arguably Washington's MVP. If the Islanders sneak up, Ilya Sorokin in the opening round, no thank you. Say the Devils manage to sneak up. You want to contain Jack Hughes, Nico Hischier, Jesper Bratt. Jake Allen's been playing very well for them. I mean, whatever happens, it's going to be a challenge for any team in the playoffs to advance. And that's just the way things are in today's NHL. But right now, the Bruins, even if they finish first, would still have a tough opponent in the Tampa Bay Lightning. If they finish second, they could play the Toronto Maple Leafs, or there's even a possibility that the Lightning could catch Maple Leafs and bump Toronto down to a wildcard spot, and then they're still stuck playing the Lightning. So, still a lot at stake here over the past 7 games. But as I've been saying over and over, what matters most is Boston playing the right way down the stretch and having that playoff mentality, not coasting into the postseason, but proving they can close out games and playing the right way. And they'll have a chance to prove that on Tuesday against the Predators. Now we'll see what the lines are. James Van Riemsdyk found himself outside of the lineup on Saturday in favor of Jacob Lauko, Justin Brazeau, John Beecher, Jesper Boqvist. Those guys are bumping up and down in the bottom 6. And will he be able to get himself back in the lineup? Johnny Beecher seems to be a guy who has secured a spot, and I love to see it. What are they going to do on the bottom pairing with Parker Wotherspoon playing very well? Kevin Shattenkirk and Andrew Peeke seem to be working at the moment. We'll see how things line up in advance of tomorrow night's game, and we'll preview that game against the Panthers on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Boston Bruins. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your favorite team every single day. Thank you once again for joining me. Please do subscribe if you haven't already. It's going to be a wild April, hopefully into May and June, and you want to keep it locked to Locked On Boston Bruins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Happy Monday, friends. Please do take care of yourselves and each other. We'll talk to you again here tomorrow.